Four Marines stood in formation, their confident smirks barely concealing their amusement as they watched the small woman in medical scrubs approach the training mat. They had requested this demonstration, eager to prove that combat training belonged to warriors, not healers. The afternoon sun streamed through the gymnasium windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny witnesses to what was about to unfold. None of them suspected that in exactly 37 seconds, their understanding of warfare would be forever changed. From which training facility are you witnessing this moment today? If this story of hidden expertise resonates with you, consider subscribing to discover more untold tales from behind military lines. The Joint Medical Training Facility at Camp Pendleton operated with military precision every Thursday afternoon. Cross-service combat medic training brought together Navy corpsmen, Army medics, Air Force pararescuemen, and Marine combat lifesavers for intensive workshops on battlefield medicine. The gymnasium doubled as both classroom and practical training space, with wrestling mats covering half the floor and medical equipment stations arranged around the perimeter. Motivational posters lined the walls, displaying everything from proper tourniquet application to the warrior ethos creed. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Hayes adjusted her position at the medical supply station at 1,400 hours, checking inventory with the methodical precision expected of a senior Navy hospital corpsman. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation bun beneath her military cap, and her woodland camouflage uniform bore the caduceus insignia that identified her medical specialty. At 5 feet 6 inches with an athletic build, she carried herself with quiet professionalism that suggested competence without commanding attention. Nothing in her demeanor hinted that she possessed capabilities extending far beyond standard medical training. The afternoon's lesson plan focused on combat medic integration with infantry units. Participants rotated through stations covering tactical field medicine, evacuation procedures under fire, and the critical decision-making required when medical personnel must transition between healing and fighting roles. The atmosphere buzzed with inter-service rivalry, good-natured competition between branches that pushed everyone to perform at higher levels. Rebecca moved through her assigned teaching station with fluid efficiency, demonstrating proper techniques for treating penetrating trauma while maintaining situational awareness. Her explanations were clear and thorough, but her eyes tracked movement patterns throughout the gymnasium with unconscious precision. She noted exit points, equipment placement, and the positioning of every participant with the kind of automatic assessment that becomes second nature after years of training most people never receive. Pressure here, not there, she corrected a young Army medic practicing chest seal application. You're protecting the lung, but you need to maintain blood flow to the extremities. Combat medicine isn't just about stopping bleeding. It's about keeping fighters functional. Her instruction carried authority that came from experience, though the participants assumed it derived from standard medical training rather than something more specialized. When she demonstrated proper patient-carrying techniques, her movements displayed strength and balance that suggested physical conditioning beyond normal fitness requirements. The morning sessions had proceeded smoothly through standard curriculum, but the afternoon held different plans. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thompson had requested special demonstration time for what he termed reality-based training scenarios. Thompson, a Marine Corps martial arts instructor with 15 years of experience, had grown increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as unrealistic expectations placed on medical personnel in combat zones. Doc, Thompson approached Rebecca's station, flanked by 3 other Marines who shared his skeptical expression. We need to have a discussion about medical personnel and weapon handling. Rebecca looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing, her expression professionally neutral. What specific concerns do you have, Gunnery Sergeant? The concerns, Thompson continued, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, are about medical personnel thinking they can handle weapons in combat situations. It's creating unrealistic expectations that get people killed in real combat. The other Marines nodded agreement. Corporal Jake Morrison, barely 22 with the lean build of a rifleman, stepped forward. No disrespect, Doc, but medical training and combat training are completely different skill sets. Mixing them up is dangerous. Staff Sergeant Luis Rodriguez, a squad leader with combat deployments in 3 different theaters, crossed his arms. We've seen medics get in trouble because they think watching us train makes them fighters. It doesn't. The 4th Marine, Lance Corporal Derek Sullivan, remained silent, but his posture radiated the same skeptical confidence as his colleagues. All 4 men carried themselves with the assured bearing of professional warriors who had earned their expertise through rigorous training and combat experience. Rebecca finished securing the medical supplies before responding, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Gunnery Sergeant, are you suggesting medical personnel shouldn't receive combat training?" "I'm saying," Thompson replied, his tone becoming more confrontational, "that there's a difference between basic weapons familiarization and actual combat capability. Medical personnel need to understand their limitations." Around the gymnasium, other participants had begun to notice the discussion. Training activities slowed as instructors and students turned their attention toward the developing confrontation between the medical specialist and the Marine combat instructors. "And what limitations would those be?" Rebecca asked, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious challenge being presented. Thompson gestured toward the wrestling mats in the center of the gymnasium. "Doc, I've got 15 years teaching Marines how to fight. These men have combat experience. You're trained to save lives, not take them. There's nothing wrong with that, but you need to recognize the difference." The challenge was unmistakable now. Other participants formed a loose circle around the medical station, sensing the tension building between the Navy corpsmen and the Marine instructors. Several pulled out phones, anticipating either an educational demonstration or an embarrassing confrontation. Rebecca considered the 4 Marines standing before her, each one representing years of professional combat training, each one absolutely certain of their superiority in any physical confrontation. Their confidence wasn't misplaced. They were genuinely skilled fighters with extensive experience in hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, and tactical operations. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said finally, "are you requesting a practical demonstration?" Thompson's grin widened. "Actually, Doc, that's exactly what I'm requesting. These trainees need to understand realistic capabilities and limitations. A controlled demonstration would be educational." The suggestion rippled through the gathered participants with mixed reactions. Some looked uncomfortable with the obvious mismatch. Others seemed excited by the prospect of inter-service competition. The supervising officer, Major Patricia Williams, approached from across the gymnasium. "What's the nature of this requested demonstration?" Major Williams asked, her tone indicating she was prepared to shut down anything inappropriate. "Ma'am," Thompson addressed her formally, "I'm requesting permission to conduct a combat readiness assessment. Medical personnel in combat zones need realistic understanding of their capabilities when situations require defensive action." Rebecca looked at Major Williams, then back at the 4 Marines. Something had shifted in her expression, a subtle change that was difficult to identify, but unmistakable once noticed. Her breathing pattern had altered slightly, becoming deeper and more controlled. Her stance widened almost imperceptibly, weight distributed with the kind of balance that suggested readiness for movement in any direction. "Major Williams," Rebecca said quietly, "I consent to participate in a controlled demonstration, provided proper safety protocols are observed." The major studied both parties carefully. "Gunnery Sergeant, what specific parameters are you proposing?" "Simple disarmament exercise, ma'am. I'll carry an unloaded training weapon. The objective is to demonstrate the difference between medical training and combat training when dealing with armed threats." Major Williams considered the request. The training facility regularly hosted inter-service competitions and realistic scenario training. Provided proper safety measures were maintained, the demonstration could serve legitimate educational purposes. "Very well," she decided. "Controlled demonstration, unloaded training weapons only, medical personnel standing by, full safety protocols in effect." The gymnasium's atmosphere changed immediately. Participants gathered around the wrestling mats, some climbing onto equipment to get better viewing angles. The confrontation had evolved into an official demonstration that would either validate Thompson's point about realistic capabilities or provide an unexpected lesson in assumptions. Thompson selected a training rifle from the weapons rack, performing the standard safety check that confirmed it was unloaded and safe for training use. He handed it to Sullivan, who would serve as the armed opponent in the demonstration. "Rules are simple. Thompson announced to the gathered audience. Lance Corporal Sullivan is armed with a training weapon. Staff Sergeant Hayes must attempt to disarm him using whatever techniques she considers appropriate. This will demonstrate realistic expectations for medical personnel in combat situations. Rebecca stepped onto the wrestling mat, removing her military cap and placing it carefully at the mat's edge. Her blonde hair fell slightly loose from its bun, and she tucked the strands back with movements that displayed fine motor control under pressure. When she straightened, something fundamental had changed in her bearing. Lance Corporal Sullivan, she addressed him formally. Are you ready to proceed? Sullivan raised the training rifle to a low-ready position, confident in his ability to maintain control of the weapon against anyone without extensive combat training. At 6 feet tall with the build of a dedicated athlete, he represented the physical and technical advantages that made Marines effective warriors. Ready, Doc, he replied, unable to completely suppress his amusement at the situation. The gathered participants fell silent, anticipating either a quick demonstration of military reality or an embarrassing confrontation that would require intervention. Major Williams positioned herself where she could halt the exercise immediately if safety concerns arose. Rebecca moved to a position approximately 8 feet from Sullivan, well within the engagement range that would make disarmament theoretically possible, but practically difficult against a trained opponent. Her posture had continued evolving throughout the preparation, transforming from the relaxed bearing of a medical professional into something more purposeful. Begin when ready, Major Williams commanded. What happened next occurred so quickly that most observers would later disagree about the specific sequence of events. Their eyes, trained to follow normal human movement, struggled to track actions that exceeded typical physical capabilities. The demonstration lasted exactly 37 seconds, but those seconds contained enough precise technique to fill hours of analysis. Sullivan maintained his weapon at low ready, prepared to counter any direct approach toward the rifle. His training had covered weapon retention extensively, and he possessed both the strength and skill to maintain control against most attempts at disarmament. Rebecca's initial movement appeared to be a standard approach, closing distance with the kind of direct advance that Sullivan expected and was prepared to counter. Her first 3 steps seemed routine, predictable, the kind of amateur mistake that would validate Thompson's point about the difference between medical training and combat capability. The 4th step changed everything. Rebecca's approach suddenly shifted from direct advance to lateral movement that placed her outside Sullivan's optimal weapon orientation. The change happened so smoothly that Sullivan's brain required precious milliseconds to recognize and respond to the altered threat vector. Before he could pivot to reacquire his target, Rebecca had closed the remaining distance with explosive speed that defied normal physical expectations. Her hands reached the rifle not through overpowering Sullivan's grip, but through precise manipulation of leverage points that his training hadn't covered. Her left hand secured the rifle's barrel, not by grabbing it directly but by applying pressure to specific points that created mechanical advantage. Simultaneously, her right hand found the weapon stock at an angle that maximized her leverage while minimizing Sullivan's ability to maintain control. The disarmament technique she employed wasn't standard military training. It was something more specialized, more precise, a method that required intimate knowledge of both human biomechanics and weapons construction. Sullivan's strength became irrelevant when applied against leverage that redirected force rather than opposing it directly. Within 15 seconds of initial contact, Rebecca had separated Sullivan from the training rifle with efficiency that left him staring at his empty hands in complete bewilderment. The weapon transitioned smoothly into her control, where she demonstrated handling proficiency that suggested extensive familiarity with the platform. But she wasn't finished. Having secured the weapon, Rebecca performed a series of movements that demonstrated mastery, extending far beyond basic disarmament. She cleared the action with mechanical precision, confirmed the chamber was clear, engaged the safety, and assumed a textbook firing position that would have made Marine marksmanship instructors proud. The transformation was complete. The Navy corpsman who had been organizing medical supplies minutes earlier now stood in perfect combat stance, weapon controlled with professional competence, her entire bearing radiating the kind of quiet confidence that belongs to people who have applied these skills in situations where mistakes carry lethal consequences. The gymnasium fell absolutely silent. Thompson stared at Rebecca with an expression that cycled through confusion, amazement, and growing suspicion. His 15 years of experience told him he had just witnessed capabilities that belonged to specialized training far beyond standard medical preparation. Sullivan examined his hands as if they had betrayed him, unable to understand how someone significantly smaller had defeated his weapon retention so completely. Rodriguez and Morrison exchanged glances that mixed embarrassment with professional curiosity about techniques they didn't recognize. Rebecca lowered the weapon and engaged all safety protocols before setting it carefully on the mat. When she straightened, her eyes met Thompson's directly. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said quietly. "You were correct that medical training and combat training are different skill sets. The question is whether they're mutually exclusive." Major Williams approached the mat, her expression unreadable. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, that was impressive. Where did you acquire those particular skills?" Rebecca's pause lasted several seconds longer than normal response time. "Cross-training programs, ma'am. Medical personnel sometimes receive additional preparation for high-risk deployment environments." The explanation sounded reasonable, but Thompson's experienced eye detected evasion. The techniques Rebecca had demonstrated suggested training that went far beyond anything included in standard medical enhancement programs. "Doc," he said carefully, "what unit did you serve with before this assignment?" Another pause, longer this time. "Various postings, Gunnery Sergeant. Medical personnel rotate through different commands based on operational requirements." Around them, participants continued staring at the woman who had just dismantled their assumptions about medical personnel capabilities. Several had recorded the demonstration on their phones, capturing footage that would require careful review to understand the precise techniques employed. One of the younger Marines, Private First Class Kevin Murphy, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, could you show us how you did that? I mean, could you teach that technique?" Rebecca looked at the eager faces surrounding her, young warriors hungry to learn anything that might give them advantages in combat situations. Her expression revealed internal conflict, as if the question touched on complications she couldn't easily address. "Private Murphy," she replied diplomatically. "Advanced techniques require extensive preparation and should only be attempted under proper supervision with qualified instructors." Thompson wasn't satisfied with diplomatic responses. "Staff Sergeant, with respect, what you just demonstrated isn't standard curriculum for any cross-training program I'm familiar with. What's your background?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca retrieved her military cap and settled it carefully over her hair, the action buying her time to formulate a response that would satisfy Thompson's suspicion without revealing information she wasn't authorized to share. Before she could answer, Major Williams intervened. "Gunnery Sergeant, I think we've accomplished the educational objectives of this demonstration. Medical personnel clearly possess more diverse capabilities than some assumptions suggest." But Thompson wasn't ready to let the matter rest. "Ma'am, with respect, I think we need to understand exactly what capabilities we're discussing. If medical personnel have access to advanced combat training, that information should be shared for operational planning purposes." Rebecca's expression tightened slightly, revealing stress that hadn't been apparent during the physical confrontation. The demonstration had exposed capabilities she had apparently hoped to keep concealed, creating complications that extended beyond the training exercise. "Major Williams," she said formally, "I request permission to depart for scheduled medical duties." "Permission granted," Major Williams replied, but her tone suggested the conversation would continue in a different setting. As Rebecca prepared to leave, Sullivan approached with an expression mixing respect and curiosity. "Staff Sergeant, no hard feelings about the demonstration. But I've got to ask, where did a Navy corpsman learn to fight like that?" Rebecca paused at the gymnasium entrance, considering the young Marine's question. Around them, participants were beginning to disperse, but many continued watching for her response. "Lance Corporal Sullivan," she said finally. "Every military occupation specialty prepares personnel for situations beyond their primary duties. Medical personnel train to save lives, but sometimes saving lives requires stopping threats." The response was professionally appropriate, but didn't address the underlying question about the source of her specialized skills. Thompson, Rodriguez, Morrison, and Sullivan exchanged glances that indicated their suspicion hadn't been satisfied. After Rebecca left, the gymnasium buzzed with discussion about what they had witnessed. Participants replayed the demonstration, analyzing techniques that many couldn't fully explain despite having watched them directly. 15 years training Marines, Thompson said to Major Williams, and I've never seen disarmament executed with that level of precision. Those weren't standard techniques. Major Williams reviewed footage that several participants had captured on their phones. Gunnery Sergeant, medical personnel received diverse training based on deployment requirements. Perhaps we shouldn't assume we understand all preparation programs. Ma'am, Thompson persisted. That level of skill suggests training that goes beyond medical enhancement. Someone taught her those techniques, and I'd like to know who and why. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two individuals in civilian clothes who moved with the purposeful bearing of people conducting official business. They approached Major Williams directly, presenting credentials that she examined carefully. Major Williams, we need to speak with Staff Sergeant Hayes immediately, the lead investigator announced. On what grounds? Major Williams asked, her tone indicating protective concern for her personnel. Operational security matters. Her demonstration this afternoon triggered certain protocols that require immediate attention. Thompson overheard enough of the conversation to understand that Rebecca's capabilities had attracted attention beyond the training facility. Whatever background she possessed, it was significant enough to warrant investigation by personnel with authority that superseded normal military channels. Within an hour, Rebecca found herself in a secure conference room with the two investigators and Major Williams. The informal atmosphere of the training demonstration had been replaced by the serious tone of official inquiry. Staff Sergeant Hayes, the lead investigator, began, consulting a file folder that appeared to contain extensive documentation. Your personnel records indicate standard Navy hospital corpsman training with routine postings to various medical facilities. However, the capabilities you demonstrated this afternoon suggest preparation that extends beyond anything in your official file. Rebecca maintained military bearing, but her expression revealed awareness that careful explanations would be required. Sir, I've participated in various cross-training opportunities during my career. Medical personnel often receive additional preparation for diverse operational environments. Cross-training, the investigator repeated skeptically, that includes advanced combat techniques not taught in any program we can identify. Staff Sergeant, we need complete disclosure about your background and training history. The question forced Rebecca to choose between maintaining the cover that had allowed her to serve in routine medical assignments or acknowledging capabilities that would inevitably return her to missions she had hoped to leave behind. Sir, she said carefully, there may be aspects of my background that require classification review before discussion. Major Williams looked sharply at Rebecca. Staff Sergeant, are you saying your record contains classified information that's been omitted from your current assignment file? Ma'am, I'm saying that complete disclosure might require consultation with personnel who have authority over certain specialized programs. The investigators exchanged glances that suggested Rebecca's evasion had confirmed suspicions they had arrived with. The demonstration at the training facility had apparently triggered recognition from sources with access to information beyond standard military records. Staff Sergeant Hayes, the lead investigator said, opening another section of his file. Or should we use your previous designation from the 75th Ranger Regiment's Specialized Reconnaissance Unit? The revelation caused Major Williams to stare at Rebecca with complete amazement. Army Rangers represented some of the military's most elite infantry, and specialized reconnaissance suggested capabilities that went far beyond standard military training. Rebecca's carefully maintained cover had been penetrated completely. The routine assignment that had allowed her to serve as a medical instructor, helping train the next generation of combat medics, was ending because she had chosen to demonstrate capabilities she should have kept concealed. Sir, she said with resignation, I believe you already know my complete background. What we know, the investigator replied, is that a highly trained special operations soldier has been serving under routine assignment for the past 2 years. What we need to understand is whether that assignment represents recovery from operational stress or preparation for future missions that require your specific expertise. The choice before Rebecca was identical to decisions faced by other elite soldiers whose capabilities made routine assignments temporary at best. She could attempt to maintain her cover and continue serving in medical roles, or acknowledge skills that would inevitably return her to special operations where such expertise was desperately needed. Major Williams looked at the woman she had known as a dedicated medical instructor. Staff Sergeant, how much of your background were you authorized to conceal? Ma'am, enough to allow normal assignment rotation without operational complications. And now, Rebecca considered the broken cover that had resulted from 37 seconds of demonstrated capability. The choice to protect her professional reputation by disarming Sullivan had ended the anonymity that allowed her to heal rather than fight. Ma'am, I believe my current assignment is no longer viable. The investigators nodded, having reached the same conclusion. Staff Sergeant Hayes, we have a proposition that might interest you. Missions that require both advanced combat capabilities and medical expertise. Assignments where your complete skill set becomes an asset rather than a complication. Rebecca looked through the conference room window toward the gymnasium where young medics continued their training, learning to save lives in combat conditions. For 2 years, she had contributed to that mission through teaching rather than direct action. What kind of missions? She asked quietly. The kind, the investigator replied, opening a classified folder, where 37 seconds of perfect technique can determine whether American personnel come home alive. Rebecca stared at the folder, understanding that opening it would end her career as a medical instructor and return her to the world of specialized operations, where mistakes carried lethal consequences for herself and others. But she also understood that some capabilities were too valuable to waste on routine assignments when American lives hung in the balance. Show me the mission parameters, she said finally. The investigator smiled and slid the folder across the table. Welcome back to operational status, Staff Sergeant Hayes.